Hello, this is Scott Williams. Welcome to Fact, Faith, and Feeling. We try to figure out what's part of fact, what requires faith, and what requires feeling. In this episode, we're going to talk about AronRa's fifth foundational falsehood of creationism. The idea of evolutionism. Evolution equals the religion of atheism. And in this episode, he talked about two major subjects. The idea that evolution is science, but creationism is not science. But then he said that creationism is religion, but evolution very clearly is not religion. In this episode, we're going to talk about the first idea. Evolution is science. Creationism is not science. Let's listen together. Well, in this episode, evolution is science. Creationism is not science. There's a number of different questions that this raises. The first question is, what is science? Number two is, what can you study? Number three, how do you get information? Number four, what is your hypothesis? So this first idea, what is science? Kenneth Miller, in the book Only a Theory, Evolution and the Battle for America's Soul, he talked about the original definition of science. And this was part of the Kansas School Board. And they said, science is the human activity of seeking natural explanations for what we observe in the world around us. They came with this less restrictive definition. Science is a systematic method of continuing investigation that uses observation, hypothesis, testing, measurement, experimentation, logical argument, and theory building to lead to more adequate explanations of natural phenomena. So he asked this question, why more adequate instead of natural? And the board went on to explain that confining science to natural explanations philosophically limits both the formation and testing of competing hypotheses. So Kenneth Miller says, to defend science classrooms from attacks from atheism, we need to change the definition of science. And this can only lead to the supernatural. Well, what is the definition of science? From the Merriam-Webster Dictionary. Knowledge about or study of the natural world based on facts learned through experiments and observation. John Lennox has said, the question is ID science? Or is creationism science? He said this is a misleading question. Is theism science? Is atheism science? The better question is whether there is scientific evidence for theism, atheism, or intelligent design, or creationism for that matter. Another way of asking, can the hypothesis of intelligent design or creationism lead to a scientifically testable hypothesis? Well, the second question was, what can you study? And this obviously leads to the question, does creationism study the supernatural? And in my research into this, I found that It's not studying the supernatural directly. That seems to not be possible. But what we do study is the effects of creationism. It's like a hurricane. You don't see a hurricane directly. It's made up of wind. You can't see wind. What you do see is its effects. The dust clouds twirling around, the blowing away of buildings and trees, the devastation that it causes. So you don't see the hurricane directly, you just observe its effects. So does creationism study the supernatural? We study the revelation, not God directly. We study the creation or nature, not God directly. But we do acknowledge the Creator. Well, the third question we need to ask is, how do you get information? For creationists, as we learned in the last video, they get their information from revelation, the scriptures, and also through empiricism, through the scientific method. Both are valid ways within creationism. How is knowledge obtained? Well, from the creationism side, they would go to Proverbs 1:7. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. Again, fools doesn't mean an idiot, just means a morally deficient person. Romans 1 says, since what may be known about God is plain to them, because God has made it plain to them. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that people are without excuse. So this idea that God is the beginning of knowledge and he's made everything plain to people. So what about the evolution side? Well, they use empiricism. Knowledge comes from our five senses. And rationalism. Knowledge comes from reasoning. But remember, creationism also uses empiricism and rationalism. So, what is your hypothesis? Cameron Smith has said this. Hypothesis, it's just a statement about the relationship of one thing to another thing. You then have things you would expect to happen if your hypothesis is true. You need a test to prove your hypothesis. You need a test to disprove your hypothesis. And independent verification of ideas to avoid bias. Your confirmed hypothesis can then be used in a theory. Evolution is a theory because it is a proposed explanation of many observations. Well, what about creationist theory? Imagine, if you will, that you're a cleaning person in the early 1900s. And so you're busy cleaning the offices. And you got this job cleaning a patent office. So you're cleaning around the office and you're doing your job, when suddenly you find a crumpled piece of paper in the trash. So it's in the trash, so somebody threw it out, so it's yours for the taking. And in this crumpled piece of paper, you find this equation. E equals mc squared. And you're not just a cleaning person, you're also a part-time physics student. You're cleaning to pay for your physics education. You're thinking, wow, that's an interesting idea. E equals mc squared. I could make a good scientific hypothesis from this piece of trash I found in the trash can. I have no idea who wrote it. I have no idea where it came from, but that is a great idea. Let me work on this as a scientific theory. But then imagine, as you will, that it wasn't E equals mc squared. You found another crumpled piece of paper. And on this piece of paper, it said, "In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth." Then it had this funny passage, Genesis 1:1. So again, on this crumpled piece of paper, I have no idea where this crumpled piece of paper came from, but it had those words. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. So you start thinking to yourself, well, that's an interesting hypothesis. Is it possible that the world was created by something beyond the world? Or did it have to come by natural processes? Again, I have no idea where the idea came from. I just have this crumpled piece of paper. Don't know who the author was. Don't know where it came from. I just have this crumpled paper. But let's further imagine that it wasn't a crumpled piece of paper. That what it actually was, we found it in a book. We don't know who wrote the book. We're not sure where it came from. But the book was called the Bible. So we found this interesting idea in a book called the Bible. So since we don't know who wrote it, we don't know where it came from, it was just this book we found lying around. Does it make less of a hypothesis? Well, if you think of the crumpled piece of paper we saw before, and we saw E equals mc squared, that idea is still valid, even if we don't know where the idea came from. The same with the Bible. The idea is there. We can start from there and see if the facts match up with what we find in the Bible. The Bible becomes our hypothesis. So remember, a hypothesis is just a statement about the relationship of one thing to another thing. So Genesis 1:1, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. Could that be a hypothesis? The heavens and the earth were created. They didn't come from the stuff we see now. Is that possible? You then would have things you would expect to happen if your hypothesis is true. From our Genesis passage, in the beginning. Well, we would need evidence that time had a beginning. God created. Evidence that the world was created by a creature outside of time, space, and matter, and did not use the material matter that we now see, the heavens and the earth. Evidence that the heavens and the earth had a beginning. Need a test to disprove your hypothesis. So we need to find that time did not have a beginning. The world came about by the material that we now see, or that the heavens and the earth are eternal. We need independent verification of our ideas. Well, look at the evidence from scientists not trying to prove this hypothesis and see if their findings match up with this hypothesis. So what is your hypothesis? In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. In the beginning, God, or in the beginning, matter. These are the two hypotheses that seem to be on the table. Evolution happens after everything got started. Both origins are taken on faith. You can't prove directly either one. Where did everything come from? From gutquestions.org about creationism and scientific, One of the major reasons naturalists give for rejecting creationism is the concept of miracles. Ironically, naturalists will typically say that miracles such as special creation are impossible because they violate the laws of nature. Yet, a truly naturalistic viewpoint presumes that life on Earth, self-replicating, self-sustaining, complex organic life, arose by chance from non-living matter. Such a thing has never been observed in all of human history. To label creationism as unscientific on account of miracles demands a similar label for naturalism. So back to our definition. Science is knowledge about or study of the natural world based on facts learned through experiments and observation. AronRa said, "Intelligent design is not a theory at all, just to undermine legitimate science. A scam, it's not even a hypothesis. It has no mechanism, it's not falsifiable, and there's no evidence for it." Because of these three ideas, intelligent design and creationism are both not science. Are these three objections valid? He said that there's no mechanism. We talked about before in Psalms 33, "By the word of the Lord were the heavens made, and all the host of them by the breath of his mouth." Now, the word of the Lord, the breath of his mouth, is that a scientifically testable hypothesis? Well, again, we can't study that directly. What we can study is the effects of this hypothesis. And what we learned before is it's the same with evolution. They assume the origin of complex life forms. You can't prove it, but we can see the effects of it. So there is a mechanism. It's just not one that can be directly studied by science, only its effects. AronRa said it's not falsifiable. Well, if we could show that time did not have a beginning, or that the world came about by the material that we now see, or that the heavens and the earth are eternal, these three things would falsify our hypothesis. In the beginning, God created. Finally, AronRa said there's no evidence for it. Well, the problem is creationists, evolutionists, they both use the same evidence. And as we'll learn in future series, that it's how you interpret the evidence. They're both using the same evidence. So AronRa was making the case that intelligent design or creationism is not a theory at all. It doesn't even make a good hypothesis. And he said it has no mechanism, it's not falsifiable, and there's no evidence for it. Well, we looked at the mechanism, Psalm 33:6, "By the word of the Lord were the heavens made." And this mechanism is not directly studyable by science or the scientific method. And we said all we can study is its effects. It's not falsifiable. Well, we had three ways to falsify it. If time did not have a beginning, if the world came about by the material that we now see, or the heavens and the earth are eternal. And finally, he said that there's no evidence. But we learned that it uses the same evidence as evolution does. We'll learn in the next episode how evidence is viewed differently from different perspectives and different disciplines. So, can creationism be part of science? So far, might be possible. It depends on who defines science and whether creationism can come up with ways to study creationism in a scientific way. You can only study the effects of the creation. You can't study the creation directly. So creationists are not trying to put God in a test tube. They're trying to study the effects. I remember one cartoon that I saw that had the scientific method that went out and found facts, and then they developed a theory based on the facts. They presented the creationist as, we already know the answer, let's find some facts to back it up. But I think we've shown that the Bible creates its own hypothesis. In the beginning, God created. And creationists are looking to see if the evidence backs up that hypothesis. Is there evidence of a creator? Is there evidence that time had a beginning, that the world had a beginning? We need to decide for ourselves. We need to see who is defining science. And is it possible for creationists to have a seat at the scientific table? So here's our passage from Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. Here's our passage from Genesis 1. Here's the New International Version. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty. Darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. God saw the light was good, and he separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning, the first day. May God add blessing to the reading of his word. So in next week's episode, we're going to continue on with this theme. Can creationism be part of science? We've already dealt with the questions of what is science, what can you study, how do you get information, what is your hypothesis? In the next episode, we're going to deal with this fifth question. Does your hypothesis fit with science? I look forward to seeing you then. Have a great day. See you later. Remember, this series is all about listening with respect. That's what this channel is all about. I'm listening to what everyone has to say. Will you listen with me? So this is a YouTube channel, so I would ask that you like this video if you liked it, and subscribe to this channel. By subscribing, it gives me excitement to continue, and it helps my numbers to grow. Let's listen together. Have a great day. See you next time. Bye-bye.